Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, to the ones in the Zoom webinar, and thank you for watching to the people following through the YouTube channel and the Facebook page of the new Institute of Architecture. Peter Eisenman is an international recognized architect and educator whose work has been conferred multiple awards, exhibited and published in a wide variety of media. He's the founder of the Institute of Architecture and Urban Studies, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He has been awarded the Medal of Honor from the New York chapter of American Institute of Architects and the Smithsonian Institution's 2001 co-prohibit National Design. He's currently the Charles Watmey Professor in Practice at the Yale School of Architecture, and among his most international recognized works are his series of houses, the Aronoff Center of Design and Art, the Berlin Memorial for the Murderer's Shoes in Europe, and the City of Cultura de Galicia. For the past 4 decades, he has published a number of texts and books that are among the most influential in the recent history of the discipline, I believe, including Diagram Diaries, Written into the Void, Selected Writings, 10 Canonical Buildings, and his recent Lateness with Elisa Iturbe from 2020. Peter is a figure that articulates project and theory in so many levels. For starters, he's one of a very little bunch in history that has a consistent practice both in academia and in the professional field, winning competitions, building large and small projects, teaching and publishing books. He's an inspiration for more than one generation of students of architecture and architects all around the world. I can't think of any other person to be their representation of the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. He has been a deconstructivist, a linguist, a philosopher, a digital vanguardist, a rebel, a good and a bad example. And overall, he is always fighting because and for architecture. So this is the 3rd time I have the chance to talk to you, Peter, on the first event for the Institute of Architecture. So thank you very much for doing this. It is a great privilege for me to be able to chat with you about your work and what you've been doing lately. So how are you?
Well, I'm breaking one of my rules, as I told you before, and that was that I should never go back any place that I've just recently spoke within the past year and a half, because people will realize I don't have anything more to say. My office has been closed since March of 20, because the project we were working on, a big urban housing scheme for Tbilisi, Georgia, was put on hold, and there's been no work because of COVID. And just Erdem and I are working part-time in the office, waiting for the project to begin. In the meantime, I'm teaching, I teach 4 courses at Yale, 2 each semester. One is a course I've given for 20 years, the formal basis of architecture or formal analysis. And that goes 2 terms. The first half is from Brunelleschi to Piranesi, and the second half is from Le Corbusier to Frank Gehry. And so the students are instructed how not to design, but how to analyze. And I think it's an important way of creating a way of understanding precedents. I think that precedents today is even more necessary than it was 50 years ago. So that's one set of courses that I do. And the other is current history. And I've never done current history before, starting with postmodernism, because I was always a resolute anti-postmodernist. And of course, now that it's in a sense over, I realized I was nothing but a postmodernist. And all of us who thought we were modernists really weren't modernists. We only thought we were. So I think it was impossible to be a modernist in a very real sense in the 70s and 80s. And of course, the deconstruction show, which is part of this history, was in a sense an epilogue for postmodernism. It brought the end of sort of kitsch postmodernism to the world. And now we're in either digital phase 1 or 2, and various forms of diversity. Basically, the notion of form has taken a back seat to many other environmental, diversity, social needs that architecture has, say, ignored or not been part of. I don't know how anybody can do architecture ever if they don't know what architecture is. So that's one of the things that I'm working on developing. What is the autonomy of architecture in an era of reconciliation with the natural environment, with the social environment, etc.? What can architecture be? And so that's a really interesting, for me, struggle with how does one deliver form, space, something challenging to the social, economic, physical world that is meaningful today. And of course, the answer is very difficult because nobody sees paying for form as being necessary. And clients today just want bare bones buildings, and you see the result. I think architecture has always been a function of culture. It's always been a necessary condition of being. It's not something that has to be new all the time, but it reflects what we feel about ourselves. And when you talk about Alberti or Brunelleschi, et cetera, you're talking about a culture that was concerned with the evolution from the past to the present. And my book, Lateness, was all about the fact that it's not necessary that it be avant-garde or before its time. It could be late. And I wanted to show how one could be necessary culturally and still be out of tune with one's time. So those are the issues that I've been working on. Unfortunately or fortunately, there hasn't been any opportunity to build, but we're waiting now. In the next month, I'm hoping that we will get a go ahead on the Tbilisi project. But as of today, we're still hunkered down and working on an exhibition in China, and that's an interesting proposition. And we're working on several books, including the idea of progettare and the difference between project and project in the Italian context, and also developing a whole attitude toward the time of deconstruction, the time of postmodernism, which I think is very important to explain to students where are they? And the students, there are many students that don't know who Aldo Rossi is, honestly. There are students that don't know who Bob Venturi is. There are students that don't know who any number of figures are. I'm certain pretty soon they'll not know who Le Corbusier was. So, and I don't think without that knowledge, one can go anywhere in any kind of cultural situation. So what I'm trying to do is to sort of organize for the next generation a series of books or texts on what has been the recent past and how we will be able to use that in our present day activity.
You told me, you just told about you're interested in working or analyzing deconstruction. Do you think that has some kind of effect on what is happening today with form, the deconstruction since the 1968, you may say?
Well, first of all, architects never, except for Bernard Tschumi and Mark Wigley, and maybe Rem, didn't understand what deconstruction was in architecture and why it was important. And what I'm working on is a book by an Italian called Olgiati, I don't know, about the possibility of a non-referential architecture. And what Decon said, in essence, was there was no longer a one-to-one correspondence between form and meaning. In other words, a single form didn't have a single meaning. A single form could have 50 meanings. And the question was how to deploy form in a way that could be meaningful in many different contexts. And the people in the Decon show thought it was a one-to-one relationship. Well, this was not deconstruction, and most of what we think to be deconstruction has nothing to do with deconstruction. So the course I'm doing is paralleling texts on deconstruction by philosophers, buildings on deconstruction by architects. So it's a parallel course. Every week we do one building and then one text, or two buildings and two texts. And so they understand it from a philosophic, cultural standpoint, and also from an architectural precedent standpoint. And so I'm hoping that the students that I get will ultimately understand that what was deconstruction, what could it have been, and what it might be again today. And I think it's the idea of the possibility of an indeterminate, what Jacques Derrida calls the undecidable, I think is very important to understand that form, because of the complexity of our culture and society, form can no longer be in a one-to-one relationship to its content. It has to explore and expand. And how that is done and how one makes that possible, that's what deconstruction is, the taking apart of the one-to-one relationship between form and content. And that's one of the things that Olgiati in his book about non-self-referential architecture is really interesting. I don't agree with it entirely, but it's something worth teaching.
Well, you talk about, in lateness, you talk about the resistance to personal expression. Like lateness is something that works against personal expression, or at least it tends to control personal expression. Deconstructivism, as you put it, may work in that same way, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm first of all, there are two things that I've always been against, whatever you want to call it. One is expressionism, and the other is populism, okay? And nothing that I've ever done has got to do with my personal expression, nor with a populist view of culture. And so I'm trying to put down what then it is that can be open up culture to its really interesting possibilities. And those were the philosophers, they did that. And architects misused, including myself, misused what the philosophers are telling us. That's why I'm going back over it and see where these points occurred, where there were mistakes, misreading of what the philosophers intended. And, you know, we did a book with Jacques Derrida called Choral Works. It's really an interesting book when you read it And there's a really good text by Jeff Kipnis in it, a good text by Jacques. And of course, it's really important to understand how this thing got messed up. And got messed up because the Museum of Modern Art wanted to have an exhibition of stars, and it didn't matter what these guys were twinkling about. They were what MoMA serves up to the public. And so all of those stars, the 7 stars that were in the show, really knew very little about deconstruction. And then to sort of marry deconstruction with deconstructivist and call it a new style is just crazy.
Well, there's kind of a contradiction, right? Because the idea is to, well, again, as you put it in lateness, what you are interested in are those expressions that fight against or are out of any style or work in some kind of parallel space where you can differentiate from styles, right? So when that's the problem, or maybe the question is, isn't constructivism, when it becomes an ism, isn't something?
Yeah, but I've never used the term. I don't use the word constructivism. I use deconstruction. I've never used deconstructivism, and I've always objected to that use. So
I think that's a mistake to.
Absolutely. And the best thing that I know, there's a book by Harold Bloom from Yale called Deconstruction and Critique. It's a little book, and Derrida's in it, Deleuze is in it, Bloom. And I'm rereading this book because that's fundamentally where architecture went off the tracks. They didn't understand the meaning of what that book was to the philosophic disciplines that were embracing the ideas of a no longer one-to-one relationship between form and content.
Could be maybe the problem.
What?
No, could be maybe the problem that the construction is associated to some kind of methodology instead of some idea, right?
Well, no, the guy that really understood what was happening was Mark Wigley, and his thesis from New Zealand wrote on deconstruction. And then when he got involved with the museum, he wrote on deconstructivism, and that's something different. And once that got infected with one another, it was wide open. And so I think that was one of the problems, that the MoMA show, even though it killed the sort of kitsch postmodernism, sort of ushered in another awful thing that nobody really wanted to take responsibility for. And so I'm trying to explain that. And what's interesting about this book, Architecture Unbound, it doesn't call it anything, but it talks about all of the different manifestations of form in this postmodern world that people call deconstruction.
Okay.
Anyway, it is a book that if your students don't know anything about decon, and they probably don't, it would be one book to have and do a lot of photographing of pages. It's really worthwhile.
Okay, so you also mentioned this idea you're working on, that is the Italian root of the word project.
Yes.
Right? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. The project, up until, say, the end of World War II, say 1945 to 50, was a straightforward term in any language. It meant to look to the future, to have a work. It meant to project out from a building projection. So there were any number of meanings in the English language to the word project. In Italian, the historian Giancarlo Argan wrote a paper, and I believe it was called Progetto e Ideologia, something like that, project and ideology. And what Argan said was that you cannot project in the post-war world without having a philosophic meaning behind it. In other words, a political meaning, i.e. a communist meaning, because at the time after the World War, Italy was overtaken by a lot of pro-communist sentiment. And the left in Italy was as strong as any place about political realities. Tafuri often wouldn't come to the United States because of the anti-communist statements of our political leaders. In any case, Argan wrote a very interesting piece about saying that the root of the problem is that in projecting projects, there has to be an ideological component. It cannot be neutral. And a person has to project into being what he or she's political goals are. So that's not expressionism. That's just an attitude toward culture. It's not personal expression. It's an expression of the spirit of the time. And this is a very powerful article, was written, I think, in 68, 69. And several Italians picked it up. One was Massimo Scolari in a magazine they were doing called Contropiano. Not Contropiano, Controspazio, Against Space. And Massimo, who was working with Rossi at the time, kicked off this idea when Rossi was given the Milan Triennale of 73 to have an exhibition about this new idea of architecture, which they called La Tendenza, the tendency. And La Tendenza were about the return of another form of rational architecture, Arquitectura razionale, that had been in Italy before the war, but had been overcome by Italian fascist thinking. And they wanted to relook at Arquitectura razionale to see if there, and something that was against individual expression, that was mathematical, contextual, all the kinds of things that made it against personal expression. So there was this exhibition called Arquitectura razionale, and it was the most important, I think, exhibition of the 70s in the world. And it made a whole new idea of where architecture was going to go. It left modernism, left postmodernism, and started to produce things called città analoga, which was the analogous city, where forms would be analogous to their content. It talked about autonomous forms, città autonoma, and there were in many of these cases buildings by important architects which dealt with the urban and the development of architecture as an urban project. And we did a project in Italy, the Conferencia project in 78. That was with Rossi and Imanino and Moneo and Hayduk and Abraham and myself, doing projects for an urban area of Venice. And they were part of the tendenza, part of what Rossi, it was sort of orchestrated by Rossi and Imanino. It's an important, I think, follow-up to Rossi's tendenza. And so this went until, I would say until Rossi and Tafuri died, the whole thing just sort of went away. And of course, I don't know where anything is today. I'm looking, finding out what is there left to pick up. I don't think any of your students have any sense of what La Tendenza was, what was Rossi about. And I think he was an important figure in this time. I think Moneo is another important figure in the Spanish context. But again, these are not the big stars of the world. They were people, working and thinking on very interesting things. And I think why I like this book, Architecture Unbound, it tends to give it a philosophical view as to what was happening. We weren't just messing with form. And I think that's a lot of what's happening today. People just making, crazy shapes and things and not understanding what the meaning and the relationship to meaning or the relationship to thinking is. And I think architecture is in a not very good situation because, first of all, we don't have the teachers who can teach us anything about what happened because they don't know. And secondly, the students can't invent this on their own because they don't know. So I think architecture has been in a very difficult situation precisely because people think, oh, architecture is about climate. Architecture is about diversity. Architecture is about Me Too. Architecture is about gender equality, racial equality. And architecture may be all of those things, but that's not about what architects need to be able to do. We all need to be able to understand diversity, but that doesn't make us able to make forms of what that implies. And so I don't think there are many people today operating. I think Pier Vittorio Reilly in Italy is one of the young 40-year-olds who's got a thesis about building. And he's a young neo-Marxist, neo-church. I mean, these Italians put church and Marxism together in very strange ways. But so I mean, I'm always optimistic about what's possible. Just because I don't know what it is, it doesn't mean that it's not possible. I'm not that stupid enough to think that. But I think, you asked me to come and give a talk about form, let's say, or a conference form. I don't think anybody really knows what is going on in form. I mean, the people that are making form, I think it's just ridiculous. The kind of neo-expressionism is what I can call it. I don't think in the end, parametricism, which is what Zaha's office is doing, has anything to do with what Aldo Rossi and Moneo and others were thinking was necessary. I don't think parametricism is the answer.
Well, you explore quite a bit regarding the problem of form in different places.
Right.
You just talk about the construction, but you also went to explore folding when folding architecture was
Right.
Emerging, and also you explore with the digital in the early stages, even sometimes without caring about consequences. So I don't know. you also talk in your books about narrative. Maybe there's a connection with form and narrative that some practices are not making, or working it loosely. I don't know. What do you
No, I think
what do you mean with
No, I think it's a good point. But what I've been saying, if there's no one-to-one correspondence between form and content, narrative, then it's not narrative, but narratives with a plural S on the end, narrative in Italian. So I think as long as we're talking about plural context, that it has to have, look, when Alberti made a column, he didn't just make the column, he made it the thing itself. There was a column, boom, here, okay. And then he's put that it had to be also that it had to look like a column. So it was the column plus the sign of the column. That is, it had to look like what it was trying to be. It couldn't be just lying on its side and be a column, because then it would be a wall. So architectural elements had independent, autonomous narrative structures. When you're talking about those narrative structures, I'm really interested in that. I don't think I'm interested in narratives like the postmodern narratives about buildings that Venturi said, either ducts or decorated sheds. I'm not interested in building ducts or decorated sheds, but I'm interested in the idea that architecture is a very and unique sign system. And that sign system is unique because it is an autonomous one to what we are doing. In other words, it doesn't matter what somebody writes about something, it matters what that something is. Is it about the sign of the column, or is it about something else? If it's a column trying to talk about turtles, then that's a mistake. Columns have to talk about columns. And that's where this idea of autonomia, which comes in. And I think autonomia is one of the terms, in analogia and autonomia. Analogy and autonomy are issues that are important for architecture. And if they're narrative, okay.
All right. So what do you think there are narratives that were won the last 50 years? I mean, the column is a narrative for architecture that has been there for a long time, right? But maybe there are narratives that came along with some.
That's where, hey, I'm for that. You show me and I'll say, okay. I think we don't have that situation today because we've gotten, look, in this country, we are all about diversity and environmental impact and, non-carbon form and all the kinds of things that people think that architecture is supposed to do good. I'm not convinced that architecture has to do good any more than any other cultural discipline. And so I don't think we can push architecture to be better, more perfect, etc. And I think we have to be careful with the reason I hesitate when you say narrative, because a lot of people who mean exactly the opposite from me are really interested in narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe what I understand with narrative is like the some you may say tropes of architecture that have been there for a long time.
Jokes, you said?
Tropes.
Oh, tropes. Got it. Okay.
That have been there, right?
But that leads you almost back to classical architecture, and I want to be careful of that.
Yeah.
I don't want a revival of classicism. We have a course at Yale, for example, starting in 2 weeks on classical architecture.
Yeah, that was my comment about, because you worked for a while with, for example, the 9-square grid, right? But that doesn't mean that you were doing villas, Palladian villas. You were doing something else. So
Right.
there's a narrative of architecture that is being like I don't know, transformed. But you got to be careful not to repeat or to make something that work in the way that the trope is placed.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
40 years ago, Buenos Aires was one of the centers, an active center in the architectural discussion. Soma was a magazine that everybody wanted to see, to be in, etc. Bluesberg, no matter how problematic he was running a circus down here. The schools were active. What's happened to Argentina? I mean, because there's no Soma, maybe there is, but I don't ever see it. There's no Bluesberg. The schools don't seem to have any spirit. So what's happened to Argentina? That would be my first concern.
That's a good question. I don't know if I'm the one to answer that, but I think there has been some changes, changes in some conservative ways. Also, the 90s were a moment where we were more connected with some kind of global activity in architecture. But well, we're now trying to get back on the horse, right?
Yeah, what happened? Why did you guys get off the course?
I really don't know. I graduated in 2010, so I'm just starting this business, you know.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I'll give you an example. A lot of bright people today, I mean, when I got a PhD, there was only one other PhD in the whole world of architecture, Charles Moore. We were the first 2 PhDs. Now the schools are turning them out by the dozens. And the bright people are writing things on what a church mouse was sniffing in 1822 in the corner of Salisbury Cathedral. I mean, total nonsense. Some of my best students are writing drivel. And so part of it is a general attitude. We have an advertisement for a new young faculty position. The person has to have a PhD.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. You don't need a PhD. I've never used my PhD. And so I don't know what's happening here, but it doesn't seem to be the spirit of questioning.
Right.
It seems to have quit. And it's not just about economics, or it's not just about social relations. You don't have the same social relations conditions that we have in the United States. You don't have any native population. You got rid of those thousands of years ago. So I'm just saying there doesn't seem to be any collective concern.
Well, I believe that there are people that are questioning things, but now maybe it's harder to find them. Like it's true what you say about the PhD. I believe that now it's just harder to find people really questioning through academia. I don't know. Nevertheless,
What are they doing? Where are the people that are putting money and effort behind people who are trying to understand and open up questions? And I don't see that in Argentina necessarily. And if it's there, it's awfully quiet.
Well, maybe we need to talk more. And,
yeah, but we're talking today. I don't know what you're doing, basically. You know, I have no manifestation. I can show you what I'm doing. And, you know, you should put it down on paper. The discussion we're having should be on paper. The students should reply to it. There should be an interchange, I think, not just of us, but other people. There should be a whole group of people, younger people than me, because I mean, I'm practically old.
Well, I'm going to make sure that that feedback reach you. I promise you that. Yeah. It's going to happen.
Because if I don't get the feedback, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right. Right. Okay, then there are some people asking questions, so maybe I can read to you some of them.
Okay, go ahead.
I invite people to write questions in the Q&A button, or even in the chat if you like. Here is a question from Pablo. I'm going to read it to you.
Okay.
You mentioned Valerio Olgiati and his book. There, he talks about no mention any name or building, just to find the elements in the inside of architecture. You are looking for that autonomy of architecture. How can we talk about architecture without mention authors or buildings? What are the topics?
I mean, who did he say I was talking about? I didn't.
Valerio Olgiati. Valerio Olgiati.
Yes. Okay. Olgiati. You know the book? I
don't know the book, but Pablo does.
Does this person's question mean that he's against Olgiati's book, or my looking at Olgiati? I'm trying to understand the question.
I really don't know. He's asking, how can we talk about architecture without mentioning authors or buildings? Maybe it's
because we can talk, because maybe the buildings are not the ones that are carrying the meaningful relationships. I mean, Olgiati doesn't pretend that he doesn't show in his book buildings. He just says, here's what he's working on an idea. I think ideas come in many different forms. I'm not sure that the buildings that are being made today are of much value as opposed to some of the texts, essays, magazines, etc. And how can anything be of value? I asked this person. There's this thing on our computer web called efflux architecture. I don't know if you have efflux. I never look at it. I think it's ridiculous, but it comes up with news every day. How is it possible to have anything worthwhile come up every day? I mean, it's just junk. And then to require something to perform every day is an unrealistic speculation.
Well, that's what we were talking about just now, right? It's hard to find meaning or interesting questions.
There are not many clients that want meaning.
Yeah, exactly.
So I hope that answers that question. So we got another question?
Yeah, we have another one. Diego is asking, I'm thinking about the studies in tectonic Latin American culture. It's a way to explore architectural form outside the personal expressiveness. It's possible to believe on an exploration on digital tectonics nowadays.
Digital technology. No, what's the difference between digital technology, tectonics, and all kinds of computer algorithms for producing form? I mean, they're all the same. Like these things, Rhino, 3D Studio, Max, all these kinds of architectural platforms that are just, you're designing what these platforms want. I think we need to go back to pen and ink and hand drawing rather than computer algorithms.
Well,
That's me.
You will be designing what the pen wants also.
Yeah.
If you put it that way.
Yeah. Anyway, we were inventing, when we were using digital platforms, I went to the digital guys and said, we're doing this Wexner Center in Columbus. I need something that's going to model three-dimensional irregular form. And they came up with a context called Form Z. I don't know if you had it in Argentina. It was a basic computer platform that modeled.
Yeah, sure.
And we were drawing as fast as they could model the stuff. We were sending every day a package back and forth to Columbus. We were at the beginning of the computer programs. We asked for what we needed. Now what's happening is that the computer platforms are feeding what the response is going to be. And that's where it goes off, as far as I'm concerned. Parametricism is an example. It's not an example of autonomous form. It's form controlled by the computational platform. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, nowadays, there are quite a bit an amount of programs, different softwares that works different ways. You mentioned Max and Rhino. There are two software that works quite different to one another. So maybe the limitations are different.
But you can recognize a Rhino building.
Sometimes you can recognize them. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. That's a problem.
That's a problem, of course. The same way you can recognize a
Peter Eisenman building. I'm trying to get rid of that.
Yeah, well, not always. You're trying to get rid of that.
Yeah, always have been.
All right. You're doing a good job, I believe. There are no more written questions. Maybe you can raise your hand digitally. Not you, Peter, but the people in the room, and we can activate your microphones so you can talk. You can ask Peter directly.
That's more difficult because I may not be able to understand their accent. Better if your English is better, so they can speak in Spanish. You can translate.
Yeah, also you can ask in Spanish. I can translate. Yeah, sure. Well, here's one question of Flavio that is asking, thinking outside the expressive personal or the personal expressiveness. He's asking, will Virtual House, the project, be perfectly aligned with this thought, your Virtual House project?
Oh,
quite a few years from that, right?
Yeah, I know. Hey, I wouldn't do it today.
Right.
I would think differently today. I don't know how to answer that question other than to say it's not one of my favorite works. But I had some very bright people working with me and doing some really crazy things. There are a lot of our earlier projects that I really like. I wish we had built the museum in Paris. The K. Brown Lee Museum is a great project. I wish we could have, the client had stayed alive for the Reinhardt house they were going to build, and if they had let us have a high-rise building in Berlin. I think it was really an interesting project. There's several of our projects that I think were really interesting that we never got a chance to build. but virtual house, not one of them, I don't think.
Why do you think like that? Why you don't like that? You don't like the project? You don't like it back then?
Because basically, I feel you have to be able to have some kind of ground zero around you. And there was no ground zero in that project. It was constantly shifting, moving. I mean, you couldn't sit and have this conversation. It would be you would be destroyed trying to be in that space. It was overdone, too much.
Okay, that's a good answer.
That's true.
So
what is the Instituto de Arquitectura? Instituto, qual è?
Well, it's something new, very young. He started tonight, so.
Does it have a magazine?
Yeah, Antagonismos is its magazine. And our last chat is published there. So I'm gonna send you that.
But how come I don't have it?
I'm gonna talk with your assistant.
Erdem doesn't have it. I know that he doesn't. And
okay, I will send it to.
You should send it
to him. Yeah,
you
sure.
can send it digitally, and we can just copy it.
Sure. Well, here's another question. It's in Spanish. I will try to translate. What is your opinion about this reconstruction, this digital reconstruction with historical projects like Sagrada Familia of Gaudí that is being reconstructed digitally? What do you think about that?
I think let sleeping dogs sleep. I don't want to reconstruct anything. No. One Sagrada Familia is enough. Two would be already too many.
It's okay the way it is right now.
Yeah, just let it be. Please. Right. And who cares, by the way?
Right. Okay, that's a great answer.
It's good the way it is. It's enough the way it is. No, leave it alone.
Right.
Not resurrect anything.
Okay. Here's another question from Mariana. She's asking, I was thinking that the amount of information available that we have access today, the fact that we stopped using pen and paper, trying to get ahead of time, has made us lazy. And that's why we stopped questioning things. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Go, Mariana, keep going.
Okay.
She owes us then a paper, 10 pages by tomorrow morning. I want to see it.
All right. So, that's a good start. Yeah, sure.
Send it to you, and then there she is, Mariana Bertoni.
Exactly.
Yeah. Where is she? Is she in Italy or Germany?
I think she's here in Argentina, I believe.
I mean, everybody's in Argentina, you mean?
Yes, she's in the south of Argentina, in the Patagonia.
Yeah, but Bertoni is an Italian name.
Yeah, well, we're.
I know. So she's
from there.
Could be Italian, Mariana.
Yeah.
And she's in Patagonia. Oh my God.
Right to the south.
You know what I would say to everybody who's listening to this? I would say tomorrow, get up and go to the Kuroshet house and sit in that house for an hour. That would be a really good thing to do. And I'll bet you a lot of people have not done that. All right. That would reawaken everybody, Mariana. Send them to Kuroshet.
Right. Great advice. Yes. There's been something.
Diego Rodriguez. You didn't talk about him.
No, he just said deal. He's going he's going to the Kuruchet house.
He's going tomorrow to the,
yeah.
Good. Write me a postcard from the Kuruchet house. I want to get 100 postcards. That's reality, not internet, not YouTube. Go to Kuruchet.
Okay.
Have you been?
Yeah, sure. It's an amazing building. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You have been also.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
But the most amazing was La Bombonera. How many people in this audience have been to La Bombonera? Not many. And to put together Kuruchet and La Bombonera, that's something other. That's the problem. We don't have this primal condition of experience.
That sounds like a good studio agenda to work with.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
A studio with, yeah.
Okay. Well,
okay.
Is there,
Hasta luego. Hasta mañana. Será otro día.
If there are no more questions, Peter, I will let you go. I will thank you very much for this. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Again.
Do it again. Get me something that I need to present. Because I mean, I have too many things just floating around.
All right. All right. I will let
talk
you.
To Erdem. We'll find something. If the project goes ahead, we'll have another project to talk about. Anyway.
That's great, Peter. That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Erdem, for being there. Sorry I didn't present you. Erdem is a fundamental part of this. So thank you very much. And see you all next time. Thank you.
Messi.
Yeah, of course.
He finally won a Scudetto. Okay, ciao. Nice to talk with you again. Keep in touch.
Peter. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much.